My presentation will cover regulated deficit irrigation. What is regulated deficit irrigation? Regulated deficit irrigation is the viticultural practice of deliberately underwatering vines so as to induce a state of controlled water stress. The goal with RDI is to control shoot growth such that grape quality can be influenced. And you're doing this namely through berry size control. Limiting water in this way forces the vine to direct more resources from shoot growth to bunch and cluster development. Besides berry size control, you can also use regulated deficit irrigation to regulate vegetative growth in vigorous vines. RDI is typically performed between fruit set and veraison. I will explain later in the presentation why post-veraison RDI is problematic and inadvisable. The theory is this. Immediately after fruit set, berry development occurs through active cell division. Applying RDI at this stage limits the number of cell divisions in berries, which leads to a reduction in berry size, which is the main goal of RDI. Furthermore, RDI also impacts metabolites such as phenolic compound concentration. Later on, I will illustrate how anthocyanin content can be impacted by RDI. And furthermore, by slowing canopy growth, you can improve airflow and sunlight exposure. This has the added benefit of lowering the risk of pest and disease infection. There are some practical considerations if you're going to use an RDI strategy. For one, RDI requires consistent vine water status monitoring. There are several methods that one can use to do this. You can monitor with a pressure bomb, a pyrometer, a sap flow meter, or other newer methods that are soon going on the market. Regardless of which method you use, the key is to keep a consistent monitoring schedule so that there are no surprises. Irrigation is performed as a percentage of full ET. ET being defined as the crop evapotranspiration constant. So when you perform RDI, you're typically performing it at 25 to 50% of full ET. And RDI will lead to a lower yield, but that depends on the severity of the imposed water deficit. There has been lots of research on how RDI impacts berry physiology. This specific study looked at how RDI impacted the physiology of Merlot grapes from Idaho. The investigators looked at how RDI compared to irrigation at full 100% ET. They found that compared to standard irrigation, RDI lowered the percentage of berries with higher diameters and raised the percentage of berries with a medium diameter. If you look at the far right to the last column in the graph at 13.2 millimeters, RDI had a much lower percentage of berries at this size than standard irrigation. The same effect can be seen at 12.5 millimeters. At 11.2 millimeters, RDI created more grapes at this size than standard irrigation did. So in effect, RDI created small berries with smaller diameters overall. The same study also looked at chemical parameters besides just grape physiological parameters. The investigators found that compared to standard irrigation, RDI treatment produced a lower berry weight, higher soluble solid content, which can be correlated with sugar levels or Brix, higher pH, lower titratable acidity, and higher total anthocyanin content. The authors speculated that these compositional effects were likely due to increased sun exposure. That would make sense in that if the clusters are more exposed to the sun, they would have higher Brix, higher pH, and lower titratable acidity. The total anthocyanins also increased which is in line with the idea that sun exposure would increase the development of these color precursors. This study focused on how RDI impacts grapevine growth and physiology in Cabernet Sauvignon grapes. The investigators found that in general, a stricter water deficit, or a lower percentage of full ET, led to a decreased canopy density, denoted by leaf layer number, or LLN, increased percentage of exposed clusters, and more photosynthetic activity, denoted by photosynthetic flux, or PPF. This graph is from the same paper on RDI and its impacts on Cabernet Sauvignon berries. The investigators found that a stricter water deficit, or a lower percentage of full ET, led to a lower yield and lower berry weight. This study investigated how berry pigmentation changed when RDI was applied versus standard irrigation during pre-veraison. The grape used was Merlot. In the graph to the left, C denotes the standard treatment, whereas WD denotes the deficit irrigation treatment. During 2011, when the study was performed, RDI treatment led to the appearance of pigmentation earlier than the standard treatment. On the graph, you can see that the black dots, which were the RDI treatment, were to the left of the white dots, which are the standard treatment, indicating that pigmentation happened earlier with RDI treatment. The authors suggested that this is due to the fact that water stress increases the concentration of abscisic acid, ABA, which is a hormone that plays a role in accelerating pigmentation. So, the higher the ABA concentration, the faster pigmentation will happen, which is what the authors demonstrated. This study investigated the physiological thresholds for RDI management. The investigators found that RDI treatments lowered yield, cluster weight, and berry fresh weight. The authors also reported that cluster number per vine decreased, but the change was so small that I feel hesitant to say with confidence that it's truly impacted. I would like to see more data before I can say that confidently. All in all, this data proves that RDI is effective in improving berry parameters. In the second part of the study on the physiological thresholds in RDI, the investigators found that post-veraison RDI could lead to significant vine damage if the vines are located in a semi-arid growing region. The authors found that post-veraison RDI treatment caused reduced root vine exchange, reduced leaf gas exchange, reduced gas exchange efficiency, leaf abscission, and reduced leaf area development. These are all obviously things that are not good to happen to your vines post-veraison. Post-veraison, the goal is to grow the vines more and store carbohydrates. All of these effects are very detrimental. This data supports the notion that post-veraison RDI is risky in a drier growing region. The other important impact that RDI has is on the chemical and sensory properties of wines made from grapes farmed using this method. In this study, the authors investigated the chemical and sensory impacts that RDI imparted to Cabernet Sauvignon wines. They found that in general, higher deficits, or a lower percentage of full ET, led to more purple color, less red color, higher color saturation, more bitterness, and higher astringency. Although bitterness and astringency aren't things that you always want to increase in a wine, it could benefit some wines, and therefore you have to tailor RDI to the wine style that you're going for. There are many practical implications to using RDI. From the data I've shown today, it's clear that RDI can improve wine quality by reducing vegetative growth in allowing for more cluster sun exposure, as well as producing smaller berries. It also saves water, since you're not irrigating as frequently. This is going to save you money, and it's beneficial for the environment. Also, it'll save you time, since fewer man-hours are needed to be spent maintaining and operating irrigation systems. However, there are risks associated with RDI. If RDI is not managed carefully, severe water stress may cause extreme damage to the vine. You can have reduced cane lignification and root growth, reduced carbohydrate storage, poor future vigor due to reduced photosynthesis from leaf damage or scalding, and the inability to uptake minerals close to soil surfaces if the soil is too dry due to the reduced activity of feeder roots. It's clear that RDI needs to be managed very carefully, and that water status management is the key to a successful regulated deficit irrigation strategy. Lastly, here are the references I used in this presentation.